Welcome to today's show. My name is Michael Juberg, and I'm with the Global Compassion Coalition. Today, we have the privilege of speaking with Dr. Jason Pandya-Wood, the Dean of the Faculty in and Social Sciences and an Associate Professor of Social Policy at the University of Nottingham, Malaysia. He has worked, volunteered, taught, and researched in the fields of social policy and has campaigned on a wide range of social justice issues. He is interested in exploring the roles of compassion in public policy. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jason.
Thank you, Michael. It's really good to be here.
Well, really appreciate it. You would like to start off by asking, where are you calling in from?
So I'm calling in from a place called Seminyak in Malaysia. It's about 40-minute drive or so from Kuala Lumpur, and I'm here at our University of Nottingham campus. We've been here 25 years, so really firmly established in this part of the world, and it is a beautiful tropical paradise.
Beautiful. I love to hear that. And how long have you been out there?
So I'm just coming up to 5 years of being here in Malaysia now, originally from the UK. And this time of year it's a lot colder over there, but I'm flying back to see my family this evening. So packing all my winter gear.
Get ready for that journey. I wish you best on your travels. What was your journey into this work? What really led you down this path?
It's a good question. Been I've always been interested in social justice. I've always been interested in social policy, anything about work or campaigns that seek to make life better for other people. And my academic career of nearly 25 years now has been focused on researching social policy problems, issues. And time and again, I keep coming up against this overwhelming evidence that a lot of the interventions that we do on people have negative outcomes. So I was kind of questioning, why is this so, right? What's the thing that we're doing wrong? And if you look at how welfare social policy has changed over the last 30 years or so, there are some things that you can pick up, some trends. The first of those trends is that we seem to be more cruel in terms of how we design social policy, how we talk about people who need help, and whether that's our politicians using particular forms of language or the particular sanctions or systems that we use within our welfare systems that kind of encourage people to be framed in a very negative way. That's the first trend. The second is, in our pursuit of trying to get efficiency or get results, we lose a lot of the human touch. So we, on the one hand, seem to be very, personalizing and making pejorative statements about people, but on the other hand, depersonalizing. So creating welfare systems that don't take account of the human, take account of our own individual stories. And so I kind of see this trend going on, and people say, well, you got to be tough. You got to be tough on people who need help. You got to come down hard. Efficiency is a good thing. And if proponents who argued that were getting really good results, I might stand back and say, okay, you got a point, fair gov. But actually what we see is the opposite. We see welfare interventions failing. They end up costing us more. They sometimes have some really tragic consequences. High numbers of people who end up killing themselves on account of bad government decisions. The motivation, I guess it was about 10 years ago, I was sort of hanging my head and thinking, how do you change this? What could be different? How could we do things differently? And that's when someone introduced the idea of compassion to me. And so that led me down this road, really.
Beautiful. I have so many questions I'm sure we'll get to later on. To start very simply, how do you define compassion, either personally or within your work?
I'm going to try to define compassion without spending a very long time defining what it's not. So, compassion for me is about understanding, gaining a deep understanding about another person's situation and the commitment to getting involved to make a difference in that person's life. All the reading I've done in the preparation and the writing of my recently published book, this constant recurring thing comes up. Whether you look at the work of NGOs, charities, or look at the academics who write about this stuff, is the difference between feeling something and simply feeling something and actually doing something. And compassion for me is in the doing. Compassion is not necessarily taking an easy route. It's not necessarily being soft. It's definitely not weak. It requires a lot of commitment. It requires often taking issues and really trying to see them from all kinds of different perspectives, really spending time to get to know an individual, their circumstances, their situations, and their stories. But by goodness, when you do that, the results are so much more compelling, so much more effective.
Do you find that there's a natural relation between compassion, as you're defining it there, and social justice?
I do. I think some people, so again, when I was interviewing people for the book, some people take issue with the relationship between compassion and social justice. I think when you get to the place when you recognize it as an active, a behavioral thing, a component of actually I'm going to do something, then it does have a clearer alliance. Where it's sometimes mistaken is where people think it's the nice bit. It's the, let's just treat each other kindly and everything will be all right. Actually, a lot of compassion, and if you look through history, compassion's needed in struggle. It's needed in moments where conflict is there. It's needed when one of the things that might be driving you is a cold anger, an injustice, a sense of something not right in the world, and you're looking for the way to respond. Now, I think we're all brought up in environments where we tend to see things, don't we, in terms of nice, easy binaries. So I'm either an angry, shouty activist against the state, or I'm a complicit, compliant acceptor of whatever. And actually teaches us to be so much more nuanced, so much more thoughtful to engage with social problems, to not paint pictures of people as easy enemies, as caricatures. So if I want to get a political problem solved, I know that to get the results I need, not only do I need to have good, strong social justice relationships with people on the unequal side of the coin, right? Stand alongside. But I also need to build relationships with power. I need to build relationships with politicians, with people who have the power to make the decisions, right? And I don't get those relationships by just hurling insults or keeping people at a distance. I need to understand the motivations, the perspectives of all the people in that particular that particular position. So I think that's a really long-winded answer to your question. Does it sit with social justice? I think it does. And personally, I think it's probably, I'm coming to realize, probably a more effective frame of reference for me to deal with the social justice questions I face.
And so it sounds like for you, there was a moment in time where compassion as a concept was really introduced to your work. Did it feel like there was this paradigm shift for you, or was it very self evident? Like, what was that process like for you?
That is a brilliant, and I've been reflecting on this a lot lately because was it like I woke up and something dropped on my head, Paul Gilbert's book, right? And I suddenly became aware. Or was there something else? I think it's always been, it's like the blind spot or the thing in the background, the explanation for forms of practice or character or things or actions I'd seen, but I didn't know how to adequately frame it. So I'll give you a really good example. Years before I talked about compassion or wrote about or read about it, I was doing lots of work in criminal justice and I was looking at people who were leaving prison and going out into the community and were subjected still to certain conditions. So, for example, they may have been given a 6-year prison sentence. They're allowed out of custody in 3, but they're still on sentence. So they're still subject to particular controls, police surveillance, where to live, and so on. And I was struck when I was doing that work with my colleague how we had 2 comparable areas in the UK. In one area, the rates of reoffending were so much higher. The rates at which people were being sent back to prison, early recall, were higher. The challenges former prisoners were making on human rights grounds were higher. So pretty much anything on that report card was bleak. And then we went to the other area and the opposite was true. People were really working well with case managers. They'd call in to report any risks. They were adhering to license conditions. So, okay, the areas were different geographically, but the profile of the offenders, the group of people involved subject to those controls, were pretty much the same. So I'm thinking, what's this about? So we went to visit both areas and you just saw it. You saw it almost immediately. You come in the area where things are grim, they're talking about people are going to fail, we're going to catch them. The buildings are dimly lit, dark places, scary places to visit. They're called offenders, they're called prisoners. The caseloads are too high. You've got junior staff carrying 30, 40 cases and so on. You go to the other area and the offices are well lit. People are talked about as people. They don't use the term offenders. You go into a toilet and there's aromatherapy soap. This always sticks in my head. It's a probation center, but you go in and you've got this really nice high-end soap. And there's a can change, will change mentality in everything they do. It's all that they talk about. So you take everything else away. And of course, I'm talking to a psychologist now. This wasn't an experimental design. These were observation. But it made me begin to think of all the other situations I'd seen throughout my career, either working as a practitioner or as an academic or just as a human being. What was it I was seeing that was different? We've all got the stories. The teacher who believed in us, the person who wanted to not just manage our problem, but get into the problem and try to solve it with us, who was willing to do some of that lifting. The leader who tackles bullying behavior instantly, but makes other staff feel incredibly wanted, all of that, we see it all the time. And that's, I think, so yes, you're absolutely right. There was a light bulb moment to discover this frame through which to put all of this, but my goodness, it's everywhere. Right?
I think you're bringing up an interesting point. The difference even between psychology, where we try to set up a research a paradigm, an experiment, and we take this little thing and we say because we found a little change here, we think all the people everywhere might have this. Whereas your work is more naturalistic. You look at this and say, what's really happening? What is actually working for them? It sounds like you're saying that through the observation, you found that compassion was the thing that really was contextualizing the work, was bringing it to life in a way that was very noticeable, almost self-evident, yeah.
I think that's a really good observation you made there. And I think the challenge for us in the coming period is to get better at doing both together. So what we've been fortunate, I guess, for quite a long time now is to begin to know compassion more, particularly in psychological sciences, in evolutionary biology. We've come to know compassion more through philosophy, through all kinds of disciplines. We don't know it enough yet in empirical work that's looked at social policy. We don't know enough about compassion studies in business, in politics, in international relations. So there's a new era of research to come which shows us about its deployment. So, for example, if you look at sort of a Google Scholar search, or you can find plenty written about compassionate leadership in healthcare situations, or the importance of compassion in the nurse patient interaction, the doctor patient interaction, all kinds of studies. What's the impact of mindfulness training on the clinician and so on? There's a bit of work in schools. How do kids at risk favor better when a compassionate approach is deployed? But I don't know enough yet. How does it help social workers? How does it help politicians make better decisions? What's the impact of it in early intervention and so on? And that's the next body of work, I think, that's going to come.
I'm so curious about that. Politics is a very interesting game because the experiment is live. I mean, we see it happening. We see, especially worldwide, a trend for popularism, which in some sense doesn't necessarily tend to the kind, at least, I'm speaking from an American lens that kindness is not the playbook right now. And I'm curious whether or not that's something that we can see proactively or only retrospectively. What happens when kindness is in politics? Is it a formula that most people back, or is it something that we actually think is viewed as a negative asset? That's something that is not necessarily going to develop our institutions and our people the way that we want. It's a very complex question, but what's your take on that?
Mike, I think you're right. And there is an unfortunate kind of chasm between how politicians at the moment, particularly in the populist kind of context, are defining the problem and defining the solutions, and are doing it with chest beating, easy language, 3-word sound bites, painting enemies very clearly in stark tones that we can all very easily visually see who we're supposed to be against. And all of the evidence on the ground that says this is how you get a good outcome. So those two things are sitting together. It is perfectly possible to have politicians who are, frankly, in my view, just using dog whistle, dead cat strategies to make us divisive, and also at the same time have amazing examples of great collective compassion. So an example in the UK, over the last couple of years, the debate about refugees seeking safe sanctuary arriving on the shores. We had a Home Secretary who oversaw a policy that committed to sending people off to Rwanda, having them processed over there so the UK would absolve itself of its obligations to deal with asylum applications on its shores. That in itself was particularly egregious. But then what comes next is the language in the newspapers, the Home Secretary wearing a flak jacket, turning up in a Chinook helicopter to declare war on these people who are so destitute, they're arriving on the shores in such desperation. And the language used in Parliament, the language used in the media to describe these people. So you can get trapped in that and say, my goodness, look at this cruelty which is so magnified. But then if you just turn your gaze slightly left, you'll see all these amazing groups of people who set up safe sanctuary cities, who set up homes for refugees, who turn up on the beaches to feed, clothe, provide immigration advice, get legal aid in there. And all of that's the counterpoint to it. I just don't know enough, unfortunately. I know a little bit from history to know that we have these cycles, whether this is a climb into populism and we're going to get to the peak very soon and drop off the other side and come back to a bit more stability, which creates more the conditions where we can have the kind of political courage for people to argue the case for compassion, or whether actually we're just going to have to encourage the other side of it, which is the resistance and the firewalls and the people who really make compassionate things happen on the ground.
Very interesting. Is compassion an easier emotion to access, or is it an intellectual argument? And a lot of your work, as we navigate social policy, you can make the case economically why compassionate systems are beneficial, and maybe some person's willing to listen to the argument. And okay, that's actually interesting. If it helps my business, maybe I will be compassionate, or at least for a lot of people, that yes, to take care of each other is our innate responsibility.
Well, yeah, and I'm going to sound like a real fence sitter because I think both are true. I think it is both that we need to marshal in order to make the case. Because so if you take the economic, the rational, what I call in the book the technocratic argument, some people want to be persuaded of why to do this, right? So if you're going to reduce harsh penalties in the prison estate, tell me what the cost benefit of doing so is, what the alternative provides. Tell me, if I invest X number of pounds or dollars in at the early intervention side to prevent problems from before they become more entrenched, tell me the thing I get back, right? So you can have that argument on the other side, but then there's the story argument. And actually, one of the things that populists are famously good at is connecting, whether their stories are always coherent or whether they stack up every time. But actually, they have that touch of being able to engage, of being able to speak to how the issue affects you. And I think we've got to get better at doing that conversation beyond those who already listen to us. So, part of one of the motivations behind writing the kindness fix is I want to get this academic conversation outside of the academy. I want people outside of academia to be talking about the value of compassion in a social policy because we are all touched by social policy. We may have people in our family and our friendship networks who are in prison. We may have people in destitution helped by social policy. But actually, more often than not, for many of us, it's just we send our kids to school, or we access a healthcare facility, or we engage in public libraries. We're all touched by it. So we should all be invested in wanting it to see it do the best it can do, to have the best impact it can have. And sometimes the stories about impact are more compelling. They're the things that connect on a human level. The person who is able to change a young person's fortunes by really listening to them and promising to engage over the 100 kids who just get churned through a system and get into more difficult situations as a result.
Beautiful. And so, yeah, we've been talking about a lot of themes from your book. And again, you're coming out with a book, or it just came out, called The Kindness Fix. It sounds like one of your main motivations was to connect these deep thoughts to an audience beyond the academic circles. And for you, was there any lessons that you learned distilling it to the public? Was there any challenges, or is there anything that you kind of embrace? You found your own humanity as you're kind of bringing it from your mind to your heart, and then suddenly out to the world. Was there anything that kind of gave you pause?
There was so there was so much, Michael. We can do a follow-up episode on things that gave Jason pause, right?
Mm,
Um, it really was honestly, these last 3 years in writing doing the research for the book, which I knew I didn't want to be a big tomb. I didn't want it to be so many pages that no one would want to read it. I had to find the balance between writing. I get excited by things like neoliberalism. Nobody should be excited by neoliberalism. So trying to write that chapter and also give people something about compassionate leadership that would inspire them. So there's all of that. But also, I guess I learned some fundamental things. Number one, thank you, psychologists, because I learned so much. I learned about things like the negativity bias and how strong that actually was in my life. How some negative event would happen, and I would come to call this as the state of the human condition. So I actually started, I remember first draft of Compassion, opening the book with this story about my kid and I breaking down on a hill and all these cars driving past us and some of the drivers swearing at us. And it was all a very tut, 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 the world's gone to hell in a handcar. We need to be nicer to each other start. And then when I interviewed one of the great people who spoke to me in the book, Susie Hills, and she said, look, just make a note of all the good things that happen in one day, all the nice acts, the kind acts, the compassionate acts you see going on around you. Just make a note one day. So I consciously the next day, just to put this to the test, did. And oh my goodness, it's like a ratio of hundreds to one, right? Hundreds to one. It's just happening all the time. It's small acts, it's little things, or it's big things, it's grand stuff. So that was a big learning moment for me because that makes the case so much easier to persuade. When you start saying to people, stop focusing in on that one thing that really ground your teeth and look at all these things around you, you realize that you're pushing at an open door because we're many of us are already there, or we're halfway there, or we just don't frame it in the language, perhaps, Michael, that you and I are used to dealing in, but we are there, right? So that's I guess the first lesson that came for me. The second is finally putting to rest the idea that compassion is soft, is weak. Because this is something that I found, particularly when I was starting out and trying to explain it in social policy as a potential. You know, you go to a job center, a place for people who are looking for work, and you say, guys, I really don't think sanctions, and by sanctions, I mean, if you're not actively looking for work, they're going to stop all financial assistance, or they're going to, hold back your payments for 3 months or stop your rent. That's the kind of benefits control culture we have. And if I go there and I say, look, I don't think sanctions are the thing that's going to get you the results. They're not going to get people into work. Think leaning in, really understanding an individual's story, understanding what's going on in their world, thinking of different training programs that might be more suited, helping them to think about clothing, all of those things, right? Really taking time, but challenging them, holding them to account for things, being a critical voice in their world because they're surrounded by people who all say the same thing to them over and over again in different voices. And I suddenly realized, oh, you know what? It isn't soft or weak. It's so much harder. It's dead easy to apply a sanction. It takes 1 second. You just tick a box, stop someone's money. It's so much harder to say, I'm going to spend the next 4 weeks hunkering down, working with this person because I really want them to get a good outcome. I want them to change. So, yeah, those are two of the big lessons. There were many, many more.
I appreciate the vulnerability that you offer, and thank you so much for your insights through that process. I have a question: as if you had to kind of summarize some of the suggestions from your book, how do we design better compassionate institutions?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I tread carefully into this because as I said earlier in our conversation, we're kind of at the beginning of the research journey, really understanding what this looks like in social policy institutions. But there are some real fundamental principles that if we get these bedded down, I think we've got a good chance on our side. I guess one of them I'd say is person before problem. And that sounds common sense, but it's actually not common practice. Person before problem, even in interview, I've described defenders to you, I've described patients to you. And actually, one of these principles is about recognizing each and every single individual who comes into contact, that we have a personal biography. And if we understand the personal biography, we can begin to make an impact and change. And if we put that before we put the label that the state or anybody else has given them, we will begin to deal with that person rather than our prejudgments about what a problem means. One of the people I interviewed for the book, Belinda Winder, point blank refuses to refer to people as offenders. She comes up with all kinds of convoluted other terms. People who have once spent time inside is one of them, or something like this, right? But I get where she's coming from. She says, you don't, Jason, imagine for a second someone described you by the worst thing you'd done at one point in your history and always referred to you that way. It would permanently freeze you in a particular state of mind. So I think that's the first thing. Person before problem, people before problem. But the second thing is we really, really need to rediscover and put at the center of all public service relationships. And again, common sense, we know that if we form really good relationships, we're more likely to see really good outcomes. And social connections are so important for our physical, our mental, our emotional health. There's all this science to support it that, if we're connected to one another, it wards off all kinds of risks related to heart disease, mental health, the lot. So, how do we build relationships? How do we create that thing that was at the heart of most good welfare interventions? So, if you go back to the start of the UK probation service, they used to have a phrase called advise, assist, and befriend. That was their mission statement: advise, assist, and befriend. They would go and work with people who were coming out of custody to get them a job, get them somewhere to live, build that relationship. They'd be there to check in. And that, we've gone so far from that towards public protection. That is the mission of probation, public protection. It doesn't take a lot to see that if you're going to go there, you move more towards a tick box culture, an early recall culture, catch them before they offend again culture, and it diminishes that opportunity for relationships. So it's not even at the most extreme end, but think about the schools, the relationship between teachers and children, the health services, where if doctors don't have time to build that kind of meaningful relationship. So I think that for me, there's two things, but there are so many more that we need to start to get to work on.
Wonderful. I find your work to be so valuable. And one of the common denominators between us is that we're both contributing to the efforts of the Global Compassion Coalition. What's your hope for your involvement with the Global Compassion Coalition?
I really love this coalition. And during the book, I wrote to the people who were setting it up. I said, look, I'm going to come on as a founding supporter, but I can't do anything while I'm writing the book. I just need to hunker down. But as soon as that's done, I'm coming in. Here are some of the things I really like about it. I really hope that this community connectors, this connecting people across the globe, connecting people locally, enables people to build the kind of relationships that lead to social change. Because actually, in any kind of thing I've ever been involved in where I've seen that happen, it's been profound. It's been amazing. There's been real, on the ground, tangible change, things that make life better for 1,000 people, for 100 people, for 20 people. But it's there. You can see it, feel it, touch it. So that's the first thing, because if we see some of that going on and at the heart of it is compassion, then there's the living daily proof that if we invest in that time and that resource, it's going to kind of yield good results. The second thing, I guess, is this growing community of scholars who are looking at compassion from all these different angles. And being part of that international community is really exciting. Being able to have conversations with people like you across these two different disciplines we sit within and finding new ways to sort of connect our learning is really, really phenomenal. And I think, as I said earlier in the interview, we're on this beginning of a new period of research in compassion. And if the coalition gives the opportunity for people from across the world to collaborate on tackling these questions, that is very exciting indeed.
Well said. Well, I'm so excited about your work, and more than anything, I'm excited for your passion. We all stand to benefit from it. Jason Pandya-Wood, this has been incredible. Thank you so much for giving so much of your time and being generous with your thoughts and your heart. We really look forward to your book. Again, that's The Kindness Fix that just came out. We really appreciate you being a part of the Global Compassion Coalition. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Michael. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for joining us. This episode was produced by the Global Compassion Coalition and hosted by Michael Jubert. Recorded in 2024. Original music by Guy James. Find our links in the show notes. Thanks for listening.